Let's see if it works now, and then. All right.
Okay.
Now it works. Now I need to tell the other people that they need to switch. Sorry about that. About everyone that is watching right now. Let me see. Let me see. Need to see the video though. Hold on. Okay. 1 minute and then we can start. Oh, what happened? Should have checked before. But that happens sometimes. There you go. So, all right. Now we can start. Took a couple minutes. Frau Dolle sagt, keine Sorgen, live in 2020. That is very true. There's always something going wrong, no matter what. But now we can go ahead and start. Good evening, everyone who is participating via Zoom and via YouTube. My name is Yasmin Nasruddin. I am working with the d.a.i since 2016. I started as an intern, but now I'm obviously not. I'm responsible for the project French and American, which is part of the intercultural projects department that I'm the deputy director of, and I'm also the director for the Education USA Advising Center. The d.a.i is, as most of you probably know, a cultural and educational institute. We offer a dialogue between Germans and Americans, and that's also why we're here today. We do that in different ways. In my department, it's usually with younger people who are maybe school students, university students, young people that are interested in going to the US or are interested about the US culture, but we also offer other programming for everyone, regardless of their age group. Before I hand it over to Ms. Mubarak, I will give a little commercial break first, like a commercial block. I want to let you know about two events. One event is actually next Tuesday. It's a talk about the power of polls, so it's election related. It's also digital, and you can also see it online. It's on Tuesday, October 27th at 7:15 p.m. It's about why media outlets misinterpret polling and predictions that are made available by different agencies and organizations, and what kind of tension that brings. We saw that in the last presidential election, and I think we also can see it in this election, but maybe we can talk about this later. And also, we have our famous election night. Usually we do that at the Kino Museum, but this year, unfortunately, we had to cancel it in person, but we do it virtually. So you can tune in. We have live programming with some panel talks, a talk with, I think, also a scholar, and then we will do a live stream of election day, or for us, it's election night, starting at midnight. And this will be, of course, on election day, Tuesday in 2 weeks, November 3rd, starting at 8 p.m. All right, so now without further ado, I will give it over to Ms. Mubarak, and she will talk about the US elections. Thank you.
Thanks, Yasmin. So, hi, I'm Zeena. As Yasmin mentioned, I'm going to be speaking about the US elections, which are taking place in 2 weeks. One second. One more technical difficulty. Working on sharing the slideshow with you guys.
Now it should work.
Yep. Okay. So I'm going to jump right in since we lost some time. There's going to be two main themes to the discussion today. First, we're going to be speaking about the Trump presidency and what happened. So he's obviously a larger than life figure who is always all over the media. But what did he actually do as president? What did he accomplish? And in what ways did he fail? And after we cover Trump, we're going to turn to the election process in general. So how do you become the president of the United States? How do you end up in the election to start with? And how can people vote for you? So we've got just a few images of Trump from the beginning of his term to the end of his first term. We'll start with a quick video to introduce Trump's presidency. Obviously, this is from a liberal point of view, so against Trump, but you can still get a sense of what kinds of things Trump says about his own presidency and how he is viewed by the opposition. So here's the video.
The American presidency has been held by America's smartest, America's boldest, and Africa's worst. But now, of all of the presidents, America is blessed to be living under its greatest.
In the history of our country, nobody has done more than I have in this presidential presidency. I don't believe there's been any president that has done more. He's got me down as the greatest president in the history of our country, including George Washington and Abraham.
Donald J. Trump, the greatest president of all time in history. America's first president was a brilliant general who won our freedom from the hostile ancestors of Meghan Markle. But President Trump has an even superior military mind. In his first week, he declared a travel ban that blocked hordes of Muslim invaders from converting your home into a mosque. While previous presidents allowed Muslims to infiltrate American society, President Trump knew they were just advanced scouts for an army of super Muslims. And although President Ronald Reagan defeated the mighty armies of the Soviet Union,
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
he pales in comparison to President Trump, who's defeated the even mightier armies of Mexico. Thanks to his leadership, America is safe from its terrifying Picante soldiers. And our southern border is now secure forever because President Trump has built the wall. All coming soon. Teddy Roosevelt was an outdoorsman with a deep respect for nature. But only Donald Trump, a man brave enough to stare down the sun, has made nature respect the president. Under President Trump, America is increasing its water supplies to record levels. Its pristine wilderness is seeing a boom in new energy jobs. And President Trump has ended the brutal windmill genocide against birds.
You want to see a bird graveyard? Go under a windmill someday.
Rest in power, pigeons. So commanding is the president over nature that Category 5 hurricanes will change their course at the stroke of his pen. Abraham Lincoln brought together a nation divided by war. But President Trump has united us even more by reaching out to the most marginalized Americans, whether they be white culture enthusiasts, overzealous commandos, or unorthodox babysitters.
I just wish her well.
And although President Lincoln had to confront the Confederacy, a domestic rebellion with many fine people on both sides, Lincoln would have soiled his top hat if he had seen the group of traitors that confronted President Trump.
I don't think he's fit for office. A man who is pretty undisciplined.
He is unstable, and he really should not have access to the nuclear codes.
To use his own words, he's a very, very bad guy.
But unlike President Lincoln, Donald Trump survived these vicious attacks. He outflanked the generals. He was too slick for the oil baron, and he put the elf on the shelf.
You're fired. Get out. Boom. You're fired.
And just as previous presidents pulled us from the ashes of Pearl Harbor in 9/11, so too did Donald Trump guide America through the Russia hoax and an impeachment over a perfect phone call.
I meant a perfect call, not a good call. Perfect call.
And it was perfect, better than any phone call Thomas Jefferson made. And abroad, President Trump's united America with global leaders as committed to democracy as himself. Vladimir Putin, the Saudis, and Kim Jong-un, forging torrid new alliances.
We fell in love. Okay? No, really. He wrote me beautiful letters. We fell in love.
And he embraced the love that brought peace to America, despite the strain brought to his marriage. In fact, President Trump has made such a good impression overseas that everyone wanted to come to America. But not so fast, because we still have the wall coming soon. In darker times, America spent a decade at the mercy of a nonsensical president.
We were made more than a collection of red states and blue states. We are and forever will be the United States of America.
Incomprehensible. But President Trump's oratory has brought the English language to new heights and to new worlds.
The combat infantrymen made a pivotal, removed 10,000 known or suspected gang members. The 9/11 victims. I have to tell you, as bad as it is to measure and other measures, heart, lung, and liver transplants, and anomalous, really anomalous. We just set another stock rocket. These historic accomplishments, shades, Yosemite, Thailand. God bless the United States. Donald Trump's very, very large brain.
Yes, it truly has been 4 years of stunning accomplishment, Shades. And by late February 2020, America had achieved a greatness never before seen on Earth. And that seems like a good place to wrap things up. It is time to re-elect President Donald Trump so we can keep dangerous criminals off our streets, finish the wall, and become not just America's greatest president, but the greatest leader of every country in the history of the world. Donald J. Trump, the greatest president in the history of all time.
So that video is pretty straightforward. There's just one aspect I wanted to highlight, which is that Trump is not compared unfavorably only to Democratic presidents, but also to Republican presidents like George W. Bush and Ronald Reagan, who are both heroes of the Republican Party. So by comparing him not only unfavorably to Democrats, opposition party members like Obama, but also to members of his own party, the video kind of positions itself as being bipartisan, as being a critique from both parties, while it is obviously a very liberal critique. So it is almost disguising some of that bias a little. So what did Trump actually do? So during his term, unemployment reached a low, an extreme low. For critics of the Trump administration, this was a result of President Obama's policies. But Trump himself and his supporters, of course, argued that he is the cause of the lower unemployment rate. Of course, once the coronavirus pandemic hit, this no longer was true. The US started seeing incredibly high rates of unemployment due to the virus and due to the shutdowns that occurred after the virus spread to the United States. In terms of accomplishments, he has increased production and export of coal, oil, and natural gas. However, on the flip side, the United States depends on oil imports, foreign oil imports. He would list as an accomplishment that he has increased tariffs on foreign goods, and the purpose of this is to reduce the trade deficit, meaning the gap between what the United States buys and what the United States sells. However, despite the new tariffs in 2018, the United States saw its largest trade deficit in 10 years. Trump has also reduced the US involvement in wars abroad, including in Syria, which was a situation that led to criticism for the Trump administration by both Republicans and Democrats. Trump wished to withdraw American forces from Syria, and he did withdraw a significant number of the troops. However, this was seen by many across the political spectrum as being more or less an abandonment of US allies in Syria, especially the Kurdish population, who have been long-term allies of the United States. Now here's the question of the wall, which was brought up in the video a few times. Of course, the wall was one of Trump's signature campaign promises. He promised to create a wall between US and Mexico that would prevent illegal immigrants from crossing the border. And in terms of accomplishments, he did manage to build some physical barriers along the border, although he did not complete the wall that he promised. However, during his campaign, Trump promised that Mexico would fund the wall. Mexico would pay for this border protection. And of course, the Mexicans completely refused to do that since it was an American policy. And Trump's inability to get the Mexicans to pay for the wall as he promised he would to his supporters directly led to one of the government shutdowns. So government shutdowns in the United States happen when Congress and the president cannot agree on a budget for the federal government. So in December 2018, Trump said that he would not accept a budget that did not include funding for his wall. The members of Congress did not want to approve a plan that included funding for the wall, so the government shut down. By January 2019, Trump did give in and signed the original budget. However, he also declared that the situation at the border was a national emergency, which allowed him to access a separate pot of funds. In January 2019, the Democratic Party, which is the opposition party, so not Trump's Republican Party, the Democratic Party managed to gain the majority of the seats in the House of Representatives. So Congress has two houses, the House of Representatives, the lower house, and the Senate, the upper house. And the Democrats were able to gain the majority of seats in the House of Representatives. The Senate, however, is controlled by Republicans, and that will become important later. So his new ideas about tariffs and so on led to a trade war with China. So that could be placed in the failure column. Now the US relations with Ukraine and Russia is a little bit more complex. Russia, of course, is widely believed to have helped President Trump with his campaign in 2016 through the spread of information and misinformation online. The story with Ukraine is a little bit more complicated. While the Democratic Party was picking its candidate to run against Trump in this election, President Trump made a phone call to the president of Ukraine. And in that phone call, he implied that American aid to Ukraine, the money America gives Ukraine to help, was contingent on the Ukrainian president investigating Joe Biden. Joe Biden was running to be the Democratic nominee, and he was the front runner, and he is currently actually running against Trump, of course. So Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, worked in Ukraine while Joe Biden was Obama's vice president. Trump claims that while Hunter Biden was working in Ukraine, he was involved in serious corruption and that he traded favors relating to contact with his father, then the vice president, in exchange for favors given to Hunter himself in Ukraine. So basically, Trump called the Ukrainian president and asked him to investigate the situation with Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. Of course, it is illegal for someone to invite a foreign power to involve themselves in American elections. Therefore, Trump was impeached. Basically, the House of Representatives, which remember is controlled by the Democratic Party, brought charges against Trump that he had committed acts that made him unfit to be president. However, while the House can bring charges, the president is then tried in the Senate. So he was tried by the Senate, which is controlled by Republicans, and the Senate, of course, decided to acquit Trump, meaning they cleared the charges and he was obviously not removed from office. So these are just a couple of cartoons representing a liberal view of the Trump presidency. So here we have Trump at his desk with two buttons within reach. One button is labeled tweet and the other button is labeled nuke. So the implication, of course, is that when faced with any situation, Trump will either tweet about it or he will threaten to use force. And we have here in the background a general who is obviously looking very nervous and very distressed by the Trump presidency. Then we have in this cartoon, the big wall, Trump's signature political idea, behind which is the United States. We have the Statue of Liberty and the United States flag. And we have a man standing at the border wearing the red hat that Trump supporters wear and carrying a gun. It's called Angry White Menistan, and the whole rest of the world is excluded from Trump's United States. No political correctness, feminazis, thug culture, Muslims, Mexicans, refugees, lion press, elites, speak in foreign. So basically this cartoon is saying that Trump's America has no room for many of the values people find important, like the press or the acceptance of refugees. Okay, so moving on from just Trump to the 2020 elections. What are the key issues? So obviously what's on everyone's mind is the coronavirus. The candidates are both being judged based on how they would respond to the coronavirus in Joe Biden's case, or how they did in Trump's case. And of course, the issue of the coronavirus is tied extremely closely to the US economy because of the effect that shutdowns have had on jobs. And then there's also the question of trade and tariffs. What kind of trade agreements will the United States be involved in? What kind of tariffs will be placed on goods coming in? Then we have the Supreme Court. So in the United States, the president nominates Supreme Court judges, and then Congress must confirm them. So if there is a liberal president, they will likely appoint liberal judges called justices in the Supreme Court. And a conservative president will likely appoint conservative justices. Because the Supreme Court decides what is constitutional, what is allowed according to the Constitution, and what is not, and because the justices serve for life, who is actually on the Supreme Court is extremely important. And this is a very, very powerful role that the president has to appoint these judges. Then we have, especially this year, issues of racism, Black Lives Matter, and police violence. So in recent times, there has been a lot of emphasis on police violence towards unarmed Black men and women. And that has led to the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. And in general, an open discussion on the issue of racism. So a lot of voters are voting for candidates based on how they think those candidates will address police violence. For Democrats in general, they would want something that would benefit the victims of police violence. However, many Republicans are nervous about the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests that have occurred as a result of the movement. Then we have healthcare. In the United States, there is no universal health insurance, but the Democratic Party has in general argued for moving towards having a universal health insurance policy. So many people are voting based on that issue as well. Then we have immigration. Who should we let into the United States? That's always a hot topic issue, and that has to do with immigration from South America, as well as immigration from other places around the globe. And there's abortion rights. Because the US has a large and powerful Christian population, for many voters, abortion rights is one of the key issues they consider when voting for a candidate. There's a large spectrum of views. Some people believe all right to abortion should be limited. Some people believe it should be limited after the first trimester or after the second trimester. And on the other end of the spectrum, some believe there should be little to no limits on first and second term abortion. But of course, there are people all along the spectrum. In general, the Democratic Party supports an expansion of abortion rights, while the Republican Party supports fewer abortion rights. Then we have climate change. How should politicians respond to the issue of the changing environment? Of course, there's the problem of jobs that take place in the energy sector and whether they would be harmed by environmentalist policies. Then we have higher education. A new idea that's arising in the Democratic Party is the idea that the government should ensure free higher education to all American students. This is not something that is currently available in the United States. Even public universities cost money even for citizens. Then we have gun rights and gun control. So should there be limitations on who can buy and own guns? In the US, everybody begins with the right to carry a gun. And then from there, different states work out who can carry which types of weapons. Then we have foreign policy. Should the US be involved in wars abroad, especially the wars the US has consistently been involved in the Middle East? Now, in general, in all of these issues, the Democratic Party tends to be for more regulation, more government, while the Republican Party tends to be in favor of less. With one notable exception, which is immigration. In the case of immigration, Republicans, generally speaking, favor more regulation, while Democrats favor less. Okay, so I keep mentioning the Democratic and Republican parties, but we'll just watch a brief video that'll give you an overview what the differences are between the two.
Since 1852, the U.S. president has been a member of one of the country's two major political parties, the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. Democrats generally support higher taxes so they can fund more government programs. Republicans generally prefer lower taxes and smaller government. These two parties tend to reflect relatively moderate political views, but there are several other smaller parties on the fringes, including the Libertarian, Constitution, Socialist, or Green parties. Or you can just be an independent, not affiliated with any party. Third parties are not that big, but they can have a major influence on presidential elections by taking away votes from the two major party candidates, which in some years can be a deciding factor in the race to become president.
Okay, so what do people in both political parties think about the major issues? As I mentioned before, in general, the Democratic Party is in favor of more government in all areas of life. And the key issue highlighted here is that of universal health care. So the idea that the government should ensure that everybody has health insurance. On the other side of the spectrum, we have the Republican Party, who generally believes in free market principles. Basically, that using supply and demand, everything will cost an appropriate amount, naturally, without government interference. I want to highlight this bullet point of union rights and labor. Although the Democratic Party has almost always been associated with unions, that is, with workers and workers' rights and workers' unions, that is not necessarily true nowadays. Many union members and many working class people voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And we'll get into the reasons why more on the next slide. So who votes Republican and who votes Democratic? Obviously, these are generalizations, and it doesn't mean if somebody is Black, then they will always vote Democratic. And there are a few notable exceptions. For example, Cuban Americans have historically voted for Republicans. So there are some exceptions in large blocks, but this is just speaking sort of in generalities. So a white man who has not been to college is basically the ideal Trump voter, whereas a highly educated Black woman might be considered the ideal Democratic voter. So let's look at these two cartoons. This cartoon is from the perspective of a Republican. So we have a woman. She's wearing a t-shirt that says New Deal. The Green New Deal is a set of laws that is aimed at addressing climate change. She is carrying a sign that says Stop Fossil Fuels. Then we have this man over here. He's wearing a Trump hat, red Trump baseball cap, and he has a sign that says labor. So he asks her, what about the impact on jobs? Because if all fossil fuels were banned in the United States, then many people with jobs related to fossil fuels would become unemployed. So she says, what are jobs? This reflects two things. First, from the perspective of this Trump voter, liberals, and you know she's liberal because she supports the Green New Deal, that is Democrats, don't care about them. So they don't care about losing their jobs. On the second hand, she asks, what are jobs? So she herself is characterized as lazy, which is a perspective that some Republicans may have of some Democrats. This idea of the lack of concern is highlighted by comments such as Hillary Clinton's when she famously, during her campaign, said that half of Trump voters can be considered in the basket of deplorables. Deplorables means someone that is worthy of hate, because she said they were racist or homophobic. And that kind of feeds into the image that many Trump voters have that Democrats are looking down on them. On the other side, we have this cartoon that reflects the Democratic view of Republicans. And we have a young lady, she's saying, "Dad, I can show 347 examples of Trump just making stuff up. Dad." And then we have the man, again, wearing a red Trump hat, saying, "Make America great again, make America great again, make America great again." So this reflects a view that some Democrats have, that they are logical. She says she can show him some examples of her point. So her argument is based on facts, while Trump supporters are, in this view, irrational and emotional. So he doesn't want to listen to her facts. He just says, "Make America great again." And what's interesting about these cartoons is that in both the Democratic view of Republicans and the Republican view of Democrats, Democrats are represented by women, young women, and Trump supporters by white men. So how do you become president? The first step is you must be born an American citizen. That means you can't be someone who came to the country and then got your citizenship. You must be at least 35 years old. And then you must have lived in the US at least 14 years. Then each party will pick their nominee through a series of primaries and caucuses, which is basically where each state says which person they would prefer to be their nominee. Whoever wins this process becomes the nominee in the national conventions. And we'll talk about every step a little bit more. Then once each party has a nominee, they'll start campaigning. Some of this will be conducted over the media, lots of campaign ads. Some of this will be conducted through phone calls or through door-to-door campaigning. There will also be debates, televised debates, in which each candidate will pick apart the other candidate's point of view. Then we have the general election. In the general election, every American can express preference who they would like to be president. When you vote, you are not actually directly voting for the president. You're voting for a set of electors. Each state has a certain number of electors. Those electors will then make up the Electoral College, and it is they who will vote for the president. We'll talk about every step in detail in the next few slides. So this is just a quick overview. Don't worry if it was a little bit unclear or confusing. Primaries and caucuses. So each state will have either a caucus or a primary. And through their caucus or primary, they will determine who their delegates will vote for. And again, this is not to determine the president. This is to determine each party's nominee. So here's another quick video that will explain the difference between a caucus and a primary.
Traditionally in Iowa. In a caucus, citizens gather in a public space to debate issues and share concerns. They then choose a candidate. The results from each district are then tallied to determine a statewide outcome. The first primary is in New Hampshire. A primary is like a regular election, where citizens cast ballots at a voting center. One important date is Super Tuesday, when lots of states vote on the same day. These state primaries and caucuses then continue until around mid-year. A winner usually emerges even before all the nominating contests are over, but it's not official until later, at each party's national political convention.
So I just want to highlight one important point from this video. Because the candidate is normally clear, the nominee is normally clear before the end of the process, if you're voting in one of the late stage primaries or caucuses, your vote may not have an impact on the eventual decision. So the number of delegates that each state has is determined by the political party and by the population of the state. In some states, you can only vote in a primary or caucus if you are a registered member of that party. And in other states, anyone can vote in either party's primary or caucus. So this is the results from this year's nomination process. This is Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee. As you can see, he has many more delegates than any of his competitors. But you'll also notice that there were many competitors, so a number of people were fighting for the chance to be the nominee. And there are some who didn't even make this list, such as Kamala Harris, who is Joe Biden's vice presidential pick, and who was running against him for the nomination. For Republicans, however, there is only one alternative to Trump, and he received only one delegate. And this is pretty typical. Normally, when a president is running for re-election, he generally runs unopposed within his own party. So the national conventions, this is where all of the delegates who were voted for in the primaries and caucuses come together and officially pick the party's nominee. In the past, this was kind of an exciting situation where there would be discussion of which candidate is better and which one should be the nominee, and deals would be cut and so on. But nowadays, the delegates vote for exactly who the voters told them to vote for, which means that the results of the convention are known before the convention. Picking a vice president. So, how does a presidential nominee choose the person who is going to run with them, his or her running mate? When you're voting, as you'll see later, I have a sample ballot, you vote for the president and vice president together. So you cannot choose to vote for Joe Biden and not vote for Kamala Harris, his vice presidential pick. Generally, what the nominee does is they try to pick someone who brings some characteristics to the table that the nominee themselves lacks. So here we have Mike Pence. Mike Pence is the vice president of the United States, and he is running with Trump once more. So why did Trump pick Pence? Pence, the former governor of Indiana, is a sort of typical Republican. He's a known figure in the Republican Party, and he's someone that your average Republican can be comfortable with. Trump, who is a very unconventional figure because he grew up in an extremely wealthy family, he was not officially a Republican for years, he's a reality TV show star, needed somebody more normal to balance him out. Pence is also a conservative Christian, and conservative Christians make up a large portion of the Republican voting base. Then we have Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is half Jamaican, half Indian, and she is much younger than Joe Biden. Many people have criticized Joe Biden for his advanced age, saying that he will not be fit to be president, even if elected. So Kamala Harris, with her youth, balances him out a little bit. And then, of course, she is a person of color and a woman, both of which are important to many people who typically vote Democratic. Polling and predictions. So throughout the entire process, from the beginning of the primaries through election night, popular position, according to the polls. However, they also do not want to be perceived as someone who only takes positions because they are popular. Candidates who are viewed as insincere don't do well because people think they can't trust them. In terms of newspaper, television, and other kinds of
there are some difficulties. We can't really hear you, Zeena.
looks like. Biden is currently favored to win, but as we'll talk about later, that doesn't necessarily mean he will win. Okay, we'll skip these in the interest of time. So polling went completely wrong in 2016. Almost every poll predicted that Hillary Clinton would win the presidency. However, obviously she did not. There's a few hypotheses of why that is, although it's impossible to say for sure what happened. So first, there's the question of who responds to polls. It has been suggested that uneducated people are less likely to respond to polls, and people who do not trust the system are less likely to respond to polls. Both of those groups, people who are not highly educated and people who do not trust the system, are likely to vote for Trump. So that might be one reason that votes for Trump were underestimated. Then we have the idea of shy Trumpers. So this is a popular hypothesis, but also unprovable. This is the idea that voting for Trump is so socially unacceptable that people will not admit that they plan to vote for Trump. And so in polls, they might say that they aren't voting for Trump, but then when they're in the privacy of their own voting booth, they might choose to vote for him nonetheless. Then there's the difficulty of knowing who will vote, meaning because not all Americans vote, it's hard to pick exactly who will vote, which of course has a huge effect on the polls. And then we have a last minute change of heart. So specifically in the 2016 election, after the fact reporting found that many people changed their minds in the last couple of weeks before the election. Okay, now to the most complex aspect of the US election, which is the Electoral College. So there are 538 members of the Electoral College. The number of electors in a state is determined by population. So each state has 2 electors plus the number of congressional districts they have. So for example, in California, there are 53 congressional districts, so they have 53 plus 2 electors, 55. And this accounts for all members of the Electoral College, except for the 3 electors that come from DC. DC has no congressional representation, but they do have 3 electors. Now, it's important to note that the number of electors is determined by population, but it is not proportional. So 1 elector in California represents 712,000 people, whereas 1 elector in Wyoming represents 195,000 people. So if everybody in both states votes, then a vote in Wyoming is worth 4 times a vote in California. And this is not a mistake. This was done intentionally. And the reason why is so that the election is not determined by only a couple of extremely populous states. The idea of the Electoral College is to make sure a candidate is forced to get support from a number of different states in order to win. They can't win by only campaigning in California and New York, because those are 2 extremely populous states, for example. So, does the presidential candidate with the most votes always win? No, not necessarily. You need 270 electoral votes in order to win, but for the vast majority of states, except Maine and Nebraska, if you win the popular vote in that state, then you will win all of the electors of that state. So you don't receive a proportional amount. So somebody who wins with 51% in a state will receive all of the electors of that state, which means someone can win with a very small margin in a number of key states and therefore win their electors and therefore win the presidency without actually getting the most votes overall. So an example of this is the 2000 election between Al Gore and George Bush. Al Gore won the popular vote, as you can see here, but George Bush won the electoral vote. And this election was extremely controversial because of the events in Florida. In Florida, Bush won with so narrow of a margin that a voting recount was automatically triggered. A recount of the vote was automatically triggered. So I don't want to get too far into the details in the interest of time, but basically there were disputes with how the votes should be recounted. It led to a court case, which went all the way up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court eventually ruled in favor of Bush, and he was awarded Florida's 25 electoral votes, without which he obviously would not have won. So it was a case of the Supreme Court playing an enormous role in the actual outcome of the election. Similarly, in 2016, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but Donald Trump won the electoral vote. And this has to do, again, with how the system is set up. I also want to draw your attention to where Clinton was winning, the coasts, and where Trump was winning, the Midwest, and where Trump won, which is the Midwest, and the South. And this reflects a cultural difference between the coasts where Clinton won and the rest of the country where Trump won. And you can think back to the political cartoons we looked at earlier, where we looked at how the rest of the country views those who live on the coast, the Democrats. Okay, how are US elections conducted? All elections in the US are conducted locally, which means that civil servants who are county or city officials decide how everything will work. They set the exact dates. So everybody will vote, for example, this year on Tuesday, November 3rd. However, many states have had early voting for weeks now, or mail-in voting for a while. They can also determine who is eligible to vote, how they need to register, what forms of ID they need to bring with them to the polls. These are all determined extremely locally. And that has had a big impact this year, of course, as each state and each county has responded to the coronavirus crisis differently. For example, in my county, they have expanded early voting to include everybody. So anyone who wants to vote early can. And the purpose of this is to reduce crowds at the polling place on election day. So in terms of how elections actually work, normally there are voting machines set up in public areas. So my voting location is my old high school, and they normally set up the gym or the cafeteria. For early voting, you might go to a government building. That's in my county. People generally do not write an X on a paper or anything like that anymore. Normally you fill in a bubble. When you arrive, you normally need to show ID in some states. Again, the forms of ID and whatnot are all determined locally. And then you go in, fill in the bubbles on your form, and those are fed to a machine. This is a sample of the ballot from my county. So as you can see, you need to fill in a bubble. First, you have the president and the vice president. On my ballot, there's for the Democratic Party, for the Republican Party, for the Libertarian Party, which is one of those third parties that were mentioned in an earlier video, it is extremely unlikely that these candidates will win any electoral votes, but it is possible to vote for them. And then you can also write in your own candidate. So you can write anybody's name here if you would like and fill in this bubble. Next, you can vote for your senator and your representative. Elections for the House of Representatives happen every 2 years. Senators have 6-year terms, but the Board of Education, for example, or for mayor, and these happen yearly. On the second page of my ballot, I have a series of referendum that I can answer. So the first one is extremely important. Should the Constitution of Virginia be amended to establish a redistricting commission? This is extremely important because it has to do with how the congressional districts will be divided. When a state redraws their district lines, that means that different neighborhoods are included in the district, which can switch a district from Republican to Democratic. So this is actually extremely important. Then some of them are more local. Should the library get a certain amount of money? Or should an automobile or pickup truck that is owned is primarily by or for a veteran of the United States be free from state and local taxation? This here is about the parks. So these are all local issues that affect either my county or the state of Virginia as a whole. And these referendum are almost always included in every Fairfax County election. Mail-in voting, a higher risk of fraud. So Trump has, of course, claimed that the higher rates of mail-in voting, which is when you fill out your ballot and then send it in, are going to lead to mistakes in the election or cheating in the election. And of course, there are many more mail-in votes this year because many people are not voting in person due to the coronavirus. So let's watch a quick video on this topic.
Voters in Wisconsin risked their lives this week to vote in the state's primary, raising questions about expanding mail-in ballots. But President Trump says voting by mail leads to fraud.
To be very careful, because you know the things with bundling and all of the things that are happening with votes by mail, where thousands of votes are gathered. And I'm not going to say which party does it, but thousands of votes are gathered and they come in and they're dumped in a location, and then all of a sudden you lose elections that you think you're going to win, because there's a lot of fraudulent voting going on in this country.
But is that actually true? Who better to ask than our friend and fact checker, NBC News political reporter, Jane Tim. Jane, I feel like I haven't seen you in so long. It is so wonderful to have you here. I think last time we were probably still chatting impeachment. It's been so long.
Yeah, it's been a while. And, you know, here's what we have to look at when we look at this mail-in voting that he keeps going after. He's done this in every of these pressers. We've heard him say, you know, you can't do it. It's too dangerous. People cheat in mail-in ballots. And here's the thing. We've been over this before. Voter fraud is incredibly rare. And absentee voter fraud, here's like a little grain of truth that he's getting at. Absentee voter fraud is one of the more common, if not the most common kinds of voter fraud. But we're talking numbers of frauds in the hundreds compared to billions of votes that are being cast. So
clear. Jane, there's also a claim that mail-in voting helps Democrats. Any truth there?
You know, you look at states that actually do a lot of mail-in voting, and there are states that try and expand the electorate. So there are states that do, Colorado has a lot of mail-in voting, Washington State, highest turnout in the country. They do almost, I think everything's entirely mail-in ballot there. And they're designed often by Democrats because they want to have more people vote. But I asked an election advocate, a voting rights advocate, does it make it easier for people to vote if they have mail-in ballots? And what she said is it's important to have a lot of options so that voters can take advantage of what works for them. So in a pandemic, of course, mailing your ballot seems like it's the safest way for a lot of people. But she said there's going to be people who have disabilities, who have other reasons that a mail ballot might not work if their mail's not coming reliably or they don't have a permanent address. You can still vote without a permanent address in many states with various sort of precautions that are there for those people. She said options are really key to expanding the ballot access to everybody. But the idea that this is about Democrats and Democrats are the only ones who benefit from mail-in voting is like, it's hooey. Utah, the Republican bastion of Utah, does mail-in voting.
Well, there you have it. Jane, Tim, a lot of information circulating out there today. It's important that we get our people the truth. Thank you so much for helping us.
Okay, so that leads to Tuesday, November 3rd, which, as you saw in my ballot, is when all the elections will happen. Congressional, state, presidential, local, everything will happen then. Okay, so now I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any questions or any comments? Thank you for listening, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Okay. All right, you can put some questions either in the FAQ section or in the chat box. Feel free to either ask questions on Zoom or on YouTube. There has been a question earlier that I tried to answer, which was by Maddie on YouTube. She asked, does it mean that people who are less educated would tend to vote for Trump more?
Sorry, Yasmin, I didn't quite hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, your connection seems to be not as stable. The question was by Maddie on YouTube. She asked earlier, why do people who are less educated tend to vote more for Trump than another candidate?
Okay, so that's a great question. Part of it is just the perception that the Democratic Party is not interested in workers who do not have college degrees. So there is a perception from many Republicans that Democrats are just people with fancy degrees that don't care about normal working class people, that they are elitist, so that they only care about the upper class. So because of that perception, many people have turned from the Democratic Party to Trump, especially because Trump makes them feel as though he does care about them. I hope that answered the question.
Great. There's also another question by Eduardo. He asks, can Biden actually win? What are his chances and why?
Yeah, so a lot of polls, actually, I think the majority of polls do project that Biden will win. Why should he be any different from Clinton? A lot of people have a negative association with Hillary Clinton. She has been in public life for many years, and many voters simply do not like her. Part of it is her personal way of speaking, comments such as the deplorable ones I mentioned. Part of it is just the perception that she and her husband have been powerful for a long time, and that's unattractive. Part of it is perhaps an unwillingness to see a woman in position of power. So there have been, I was just reading an article about voters who did not vote for Clinton, but are interested in voting for Biden. So yes, there is a chance he'll win. But as I discussed in the presentation, although there is a chance that he will win, the polling is not 100% reliable. And so we can't really know until after the election.
Great. There is another question by Ms. O'Donnell. What would you choose to change about the system if you could?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's possible that a straight popular vote would be a better system, because the Electoral College does kind of take away from the power of each individual's vote, since different people have the possibility of making a large impact or a small impact depending on where they live. So it's possible that a direct popular vote would be a better system for this modern age.
I actually have a question, and yesterday we had a talk by a professor about Black women voting for people who are not white and not male. And I was asking a question about voter suppression, and maybe I can ask you a similar question on your opinion. What do you think will voter suppression have a big impact on the outcome of the election this year, especially concerning the pandemic?
Honestly, yes, I think it will likely have an impact. There's already talks of the Republican Party in some places putting up fake boxes for dropping off ballots and stuff like that. I think there have been efforts just to make voting less convenient, like in Texas, where the governor has decided that there will only be one drop-off area for ballots per county, which means that some people will have to travel quite far in order to drop off their ballot. I think there will still be normal in-person voting. Not sure, since I'm not a Texan, but I do believe there will still be normal voting. But for people who are afraid of voting in normal polling places due to the coronavirus, they may find it too difficult to vote. So yes, this year, I think it is likely that we will see some serious effects from voter suppression.
Also for the Germans, maybe to understand this better, usually when we vote by mail-in, you can just drop it off at any postal office or like PO box that is on your way to school or work. There is no separate postal box for you to put in your ballot. And also, if you think about it, if your county is basically the equivalent to a Landkreis. And if you think about the Landkreis in Tübingen and you need, and there's only one box, I don't know, maybe in Rottenburg or somewhere else, like in a little village, and everyone has to travel there to put the ballot in one box, it's really a struggle for people to get there and like really vote. There is a question, there are multiple questions on YouTube by Sharifa. That's one is more personal, the other is not so much. The first question is, who are you voting for, if you want to disclose? And the second question by her is, why is the symbol for the parties a donkey and an elephant?
Okay, so the personal one, I am voting for Biden. The not personal one, I actually don't know why those are the symbols. They just have been for as long as I can remember, but I'm not sure where those came from. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I don't really know either. So I'm an American Studies scholar and I never thought about it. But
Yeah.
the interesting thing is that I saw this year that the symbol changed a little bit, so everyone recognizes the donkey and the the elephant, but otherwise Oh, Mr. O'Donnell says nobody knows why elephant and donkey. Okay, so no one knows why it's an
Great.
elephant and donkey. Maybe it's the favorite animal of these parties and they voted on it. It could have been a sloth and a kangaroo, but they're not like very common in the US, so we don't know. But there are changes in the symbols this year, kind of. So maybe have a look out on that. Then there is a question, but also by Sharifa. She asks, do you think that Trump is going to be elected again?
I think for all of us who voted in the 2016 election and then were disappointed, there's kind of it's hard to explain what it was like to be in the United States the morning after Trump won, in that everybody was just so surprised. So I think there's kind of anything can happen feeling. I think that it is possible for him to win again. The feelings I described of people feeling alienated from the Democratic Party, they are less with Biden, who has a working class background and is known to be a friend to working class people, but they are very real. And so I think it is possible that people will continue to say that they won't vote for Trump and then possibly actually vote for Trump, as may have happened last time. We're not sure. So yes, I do think it's possible that he would win again.
Maddie asks on YouTube, from which state do you come from? Is it a red or blue state?
I am from Virginia, which is currently pretty blue, although that's a recent development. Blue meaning Democratic.
Why do you think it changed over time in Virginia? Do you have an idea why?
So it depends on how far back you go. Virginia is part of the South officially, and it is one of the states who fought on the side of the South during the Civil War. So it does have a history of being tied to the South culturally. As for why it has changed recently, it's still only blue leaning, but my guess would be that has to do with the large numbers of liberal leaning people who live in Northern Virginia, which is the bluer part of the state compared to Southern Virginia. And those include many people who are living in Virginia and working in DC. And many of those people are more liberal than people in other parts of the state. So I would say that's probably where the focus of the change is.
I think it's also important to note that other states who are usually typically blue don't necessarily are blue states or red states across the region. So for example, California, everyone knows California seems to be pretty blue. Everyone is liberal. Marijuana is legal. Everything is a little bit more relaxed. But if you go outside of San Francisco or Los Angeles, like little towns tend to be more Republican leaning or conservative. So that's always good to remember, and that you usually don't see because of the electoral college. You usually see winner takes all, and then one or the other gets the state. But there are a lot of states, if you take out like big metropolitan areas, they would look very different. So keep that in mind.
That's true. Other examples include Texas, which is famously very red, but certainly has big blue cities like Austin. So everything is much more mixed than the Electoral College necessarily lets you see.
Maddie also has another question, and she says it's a little bit off topic. How is it to live with COVID-19 in the US?
Well, so it depends very, very heavily on what state you live in. Some states are taking the virus much more seriously than others. And unfortunately, in the United States, there's a very political divide. So the president has decided not to take COVID seriously. Therefore, Republican states or states with Republican governors are also not taking COVID seriously. So to bring up Texas again, I have a friend who lives there, and she was mentioning how she saw little disruption in her day-to-day life because the virus is not being really dealt with there. People are not shutting down or anything like that. In Virginia, however, where my family lives, my father has been working from home since March. My cousin who goes to college there, all her classes are online. So it really differs vastly depending on where you live.
Yeah, also a friend of mine, she lived in New York City, and big city, which basically shut down and is still shut down. She couldn't do anything, and like if she took a walk down the block, there were always like signs and that you can't go there. So it was because New York City was a hotspot, so it was very hard to go by. But if you look into other states or towns, it's very difficult. Elena asks, do you have a favorite American president of all time? That's a good question.
Well, pretty cynical towards the presidents in general.
Right.
But I can share some positive thoughts. When Obama was elected, that was kind of, I said, it's difficult to explain what it was like when Trump was elected, the kind of negative feeling. I was at university at the time, the kind of negative feeling in general on campus. And when Obama was elected, it was just the complete opposite, because we didn't think that an African-American man would be elected, that he would actually win. And so that was kind of an inspiring moment for a minority living in the United States. So that was an inspiring moment. And then there are bits of inspiration you can find in other presidents, like in Franklin Roosevelt and his expansion of the ways government can help the people in terms of creating programs like Social Security, etc. So there are bits I could find in each of the presidents, but I could probably find something dark in each of them too.
I think that's pretty normal also here in Germany for German politicians. There's another question by Sharifa. She says, I have some American friends who live in Germany. Can they actually vote for an American president?
Yes, an American living in Germany can vote for the American president. What they have to do depends, you may be tired of this answer, but on the state in which they live. Generally speaking, you vote in the state you lived in last. And then you just need to register. You'll receive a ballot. You'll fill out the ballot and mail it. That's generally speaking the procedure. For my own ballot, I was able to register for it online. And then they emailed me the ballot, and then I needed to print it and I need to mail it. But the exact steps differs depending on the state in question.
There are a lot of Americans working here at the Institute, and everyone has a different process currently with voting. So, for example, for California and Oregon, they can mail it via email. So they just print out their ballot, sign it, scan it, and then just email it. Of course, there are like data privacy issues related, and they just waiver those concerns, so they can just email it. Others, as Zina said, they mail it in by postal mail, so snail mail. It takes a while. And others, for example, another one is faxing it with a fax machine. So everything is possible at this point.
An interesting aspect of voting abroad for my county is you need to have a witness in order to vote. Which is not the case if you vote in person. The instructions are very specific that a witness needs to be present, but they should not be able to actually see what you are filling out in your ballot. So it's very specific. And then they need to sign the ballot as well. So
Interesting. All right, then there's another question by Sharifa. It's a little bit off topic, but she asked, do you think the that this pandemic will end soon? And if so, when? And maybe I can piggyback on that. What do you think? What kind of impact does it have on US politics after the elections?
Oh, okay. So I think that the pandemic will probably continue for some time, but we will learn how to deal with it a little bit better, just because it's impossible for a vaccine to be tested so quickly, to be created and tested and pass all the requisite trials so quickly. The effect on US politics. So obviously the coronavirus has hurt Trump because it has hurt the economy, which is one of the areas that was a strength for him previously. So the next president will, I think, be very focused on minimizing the coronavirus's effect on the economy to avoid what happened with Trump's lowered approval ratings in wake of the coronavirus. Unfortunately, I think that might mean pushing through a vaccine before it is ready, just so people can move on from this crisis. I think it will affect American politics in that the new president, whoever he is, will feel the need to show that he is aggressively fighting coronavirus, which might mean trying to get a vaccine out, or might mean another stimulus package like the one that happened earlier when Congress agreed to send money to every American to offset the costs of the virus.
Then there's another question by Clara. What do you think about the presidential debates that happened so far? The two.
Okay, so the presidential debates. The first debate was, of course, a few weeks ago, and it came just before Trump was hospitalized for COVID. It was very aggressive compared to other debates with other candidates. Because Trump was speaking over Joe Biden grew frustrated and told him to shut up. It just did not have the presidential there was not the formality that we normally expect in events with the president or events of this level of seriousness. It did not have, it was much more focused on the optics of it, what the media will report, things like that, kind of this bullying aspect from President Trump, which I think for many commentators was very disappointing to people. The second debate was not actually a debate, it was just two town halls that occurred at the same time. And just the fact that such a thing happened, that each candidate decided to, or that Donald Trump decided to hold a town hall at the same time as Joe Biden's town hall after refusing to have a distanced debate shows, again, a disappointing lack of presidential demeanor.
Sharifa also asks, do you think the number of voters will be faked?
As we saw in the last clip, it's possible, but it seems unlikely that it will be to a large enough degree that will actually affect the outcome of the election.
Then will the Sharifa also asks, will the vaccine be expensive at first?
That's hard to say. I think that I'm only guessing here. I don't know too much about this industry, but I would guess that it would be subsidized by the government, since the government would like everyone to take the vaccine and for business to be back to normal. I would not expect it to be prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, I also think that it would be counterintuitive. And also, Vice Presidential candidate Kamala Harris also said, if there will be a vaccine available, it will be free for everyone. So take that with a grain of salt, because the Trump administration, if they win again, might say something else or the same. So we don't really know what will happen. Also in Germany, we don't know if we have to pay for it or it will be free, or will there be subsidies, and will maybe the health insurance cover the cost? We don't really know that here as well. Sharif also asks, I heard that they will mute the mics next time during the debate. Is that true? I can also answer that. The third and final debate was cancelled because Trump would not agree to do a virtual presidential debate. He wanted to do it in person again. And because of that, it was cancelled. So it will be muted forever, I guess. Yeah, there's another question by Elena. She asked, can you imagine yourself being a president?
Oh, it seems like a very scary job, a lot of responsibilities. The problem with being placed in a position of power like that is I think you would probably come in with a lot of ideals and then find that the system is set up in such a way that you cannot necessarily make meaningful change. So I don't know that I would want to be president. Yeah.
What do you think about Kanye West's presidential campaign? Asks Maddie.
Well, my honest response is that I think Kanye West is mentally ill and I think his family should take care of him. I actually find it very problematic the way the media talks about Kanye West and makes his public breakdowns into an entertainment, because it's clear to me that he is suffering from mental health issues. And he has also spoken himself about his mental health problems and his struggles with mental health. I think he has bipolar disorder or something like that. I'm not sure of the exact diagnosis. So I think it's problematic that someone who's clearly acting out as a result of illnesses is used as an entertainment because the media needs something to talk about.
Paul asks, do you think the way Donald Trump handled corona, his own corona diagnosis, will affect or influence the election?
Yes. So I think for a lot of people, the fact that Trump did not have a difficult time with the coronavirus will sort of serve as proof that the coronavirus is nothing to worry about. And a lot of people who live in red states, Republican states, already believe this. So they will likely find their point of view supported by the fact that the president was able to recover. And this is important for the election because they might connect the dots and think, oh, Trump was right about the coronavirus not being a big deal. Therefore, Democrats are making too big of a deal with the shutdown and hurting us economically for no reason. Therefore, I better vote for Trump. So some people might make that connection. So I do think it'll impact the election.
Yeah, that was the last question. I think that's also a good point to end this conversation right now. But if you want, you can see the presentation on YouTube and go back to it and refer to it in your classrooms, talk with your peers. If you have any further questions, you can contact the d.a.i. As I said, we have a presentation or a talk next week about the power of polls. So polling will be a huge topic again, and also the election night will be interesting, even though we probably won't see a definite result on that night, but of course it will be significant nonetheless. All right, thank you, Zeena, so much for your presentation. Thank you to the audience on YouTube and Zoom for tuning in, and we hope to see you soon, sometime soon. Have a good night. Bye.
Good night, thanks.
Zeena, could you make me a host again? Because then I can stop the YouTube stream.
Yep.